Hello everyone, and welcome to the territory of cinema. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button if you enjoy our content. Today, we are going to be discussing the movie Rush Hour 3 from 2007. The familiar, almost comforting rhythm of mismatched partners being thrust back together kicks off the action, as Detective Lee, ever the embodiment of precision, honed through years of disciplined martial arts training back in Hong Kong, finds himself unexpectedly reunited with Detective Carter in Los Angeles. Carter, whose career trajectory has always favored improvisational chaos over rigid structure, is, as usual, causing more noise than progress. Their forced reunion is courtesy of a summons regarding the triad, specifically an old enemy, a shadowy figure named Shai Shen, whose reemergence threatens to unravel years of uneasy peace. The chase quickly takes them across the Pacific, landing them in the vibrant yet dangerous underworld of Paris. Lee, whose dedication to duty is rooted deeply in the traditions he respects, is focused on justice for his past mentor, Ambassador Han, who is now targeted by Shen. Meanwhile, Carter, whose natural charisma allows him to effortlessly charm his way through roadblocks, often to Lee's profound irritation, is simply trying to keep up with the cultural whiplash and the rapidly escalating body count. In Paris, their investigation brings them into contact with the formidable Parisian police force, specifically a very serious, very rule-bound inspector, whose meticulous approach clashes immediately with Carter's act first, apologize never philosophy. Lee, drawing upon the same inner stillness that allowed him to master kung fu forms under demanding masters, navigates the labyrinthine streets, seeking out information connecting Shen to a vast international conspiracy. A key player emerges, a young Frenchwoman, possibly a dancer, or perhaps something far more secretive, who holds the key to uncovering Shen's true objectives. She represents a flicker of hope amid the escalating violence, reminding Lee that not every adversary is a faceless organization. Sometimes the target is personal. The narrative builds towards a climactic showdown, inevitably set against an iconic Parisian backdrop. This time it seems to be the steps of a grand structure, perhaps a historical site, where the final confrontation occurs. Carter, naturally, ends up doing something physically ridiculous but surprisingly effective, leaning into the slapstick elements of his persona, while Lee brings his perfected martial skills to bear against Shen's numerous enforcers. It's the classic juxtaposition. Carter's loud, chaotic energy meeting Lee's quiet, deadly focus. The resolution, messy but ultimately successful, reaffirms that despite their wildly different approaches to life and policing, one preferring the carefully planned sequence, the other relying on pure reactive instinct, they are, frustratingly and perhaps inevitably, the perfect team. They walk away from the wreckage, ready for the next inevitable call that will drag them from their respective comfort zones. The initial tension between Lee and Carter is palpable, a well-worn friction born from years of proximity. Lee's dedication to his craft, visible in the almost painful control he exerts over his movements and expressions, contrasts sharply with Carter's reliance on loud suits and even louder one-liners. Carter views every situation as a chance for performance. His career in the LAPD has always been one of flair over finesse, a quality that drives Lee, whose respect is earned through rigorous discipline, nearly to distraction. When they land in Paris, this cultural dislocation only magnifies their differences. Lee finds himself navigating a world where the rules are subtle, spoken and unspoken glances, requiring an almost intellectual decoding, whereas Carter treats the French police like an overly formal version of the Hollywood extras he's used to dealing with. The pursuit of Shai Shen is deeply personal for Lee. Ambassador Han wasn't just a superior, he was a stabilizing force, a connection to the traditional values Lee clings to amidst the dizzying pace of modern international crime. Shen, conversely, represents a betrayal of those old codes, a modern mercenary operating with callous disregard for the bonds that once governed the underworld. This pursuit fuels Lee, adding a layer of grim determination to his already formidable fighting style. He moves with the grace of a dancer who has spent decades mastering every muscle group, his focus absolute. Carter's adaptation, or lack thereof, is a source of ongoing comedy and occasional accidental insight. He struggles hilariously with the language barrier, often relying on exaggerated gestures and a booming confidence that somehow, miraculously, cuts through bureaucratic red tape. He sees the whole operation less as a life-or-death struggle against organized crime and more as a high-stakes vacation where he occasionally has to punch someone. Yet, it's this very unpredictability that occasionally saves them. While Lee is methodically mapping out the connections through surveillance and quiet interrogations, Carter might bump into the crucial informant in a cafe simply because he decided to order something complicated off the menu. The introduction of the Parisian contact further complicates matters. She is a woman of sharp edges and guarded secrets, someone who understands the nuances of deception on a European scale. Her presence forces Lee to step outside his rigid framework, demanding empathy and trust, qualities he usually reserves for the ghost of his past mentor. For Carter, she is merely another fascinating puzzle to solve with charm, though he senses beneath her composure a real danger that even his usual bravado has trouble masking. Their final confrontation, set against the magnificent, indifferent grandeur of a Parisian landmark, is less about proving who is the better fighter and more about demonstrating the necessity of their combined wavelengths. Lee handles the precision strikes against the high-level threats, the choreography of his self-defense flawless. Carter, meanwhile, manages to use the environment, a rolling cart, a loose piece of scaffolding, perhaps an entire decorative fountain, to create the necessary, spectacular distraction that allows Lee the opening he needs. It is the ultimate testament to their partnership, the quiet, unyielding foundation supporting the exuberant, unpredictable facade. When the dust settles, both men are exhausted, yet there is a flicker of something akin to mutual respect in their shared sigh before they turn toward the inevitable paperwork. The air around Lee is perpetually taut, a testament to the hundreds of hours spent perfecting forms until they became second nature, an external manifestation of an internalized code of conduct. You can see it in the way he holds a teacup or how he stands waiting for a traffic light, a coiled potential energy that seldom dissipates entirely. This inner discipline is precisely what makes Carter's constant need for verbal commentary and physical exuberance feel like sandpaper against polished steel. Carter operates on impulse. His mind seems to process information through a series of comedic reactions rather than logical steps. His greatest strength and greatest flaw is his absolute, unshakable belief in his own capacity to talk or punch his way out of any bind, a trait that has seen him celebrated by precinct captains who value results over procedure, yet infuriates the measured, thoughtful Lee. When they reach Paris, the contrast deepens. Lee is trying to honor the memory of Ambassador Han, a man who represented the old world order where loyalty was paramount. Shen's betrayal is not just a crime, it's a personal affront to Lee's entire moral architecture. He approaches the investigation with the solemnity of a memorial service, tracing every clue with painstaking care, determined to see the end of the line for the man who defiled that trust. He meticulously studies the flow of the Parisian underworld, recognizing the echoes of old criminal hierarchies even beneath the modern veneer. Carter, however, treats Paris like an elaborate, poorly signposted theme park. His struggle isn't just the language, it's the perceived lack of urgency in everyone else. He misses the directness of American confrontation. He finds himself constantly misinterpreting subtle Gallic shrugs for complicity or outright hostility. Yet, this very alienation forces him into the open. Where Lee might spend hours observing a target from a safe distance, Carter, fueled by frustration and jet lag, might stride into a high-end boutique demanding information, startling the target into a revealing confession simply through sheer unexpected audacity. His internal monologue, if ever recorded, would likely be a rapid-fire series of one-liners, constantly attempting to inject levity into what Lee considers a sacred duty. The alliance with the French operative, the keeper of secrets, pushes both men to their personal edges. For Lee, trusting her requires setting aside his cultural expectations and accepting that intelligence can arrive wrapped in mystery and coded suggestion, not just straightforward reports. He begins to watch her movements with an analytical eye, admiring her capability, even if her methods are frustratingly oblique. For Carter, she presents a challenge he can't simply overcome with volume. She meets his bluster with cool, superior silence, forcing him for brief, shining moments to actually listen before he speaks. This forced introspection is rare for him, and he carries a newfound, awkward respect for her competence. The final confrontation is less a battle and more an operatic collision of styles. It's the disciplined flow of Wing Chun, meeting the brute force of improvised physics. Lee is a blur of focused strikes, each movement economical, designed to neutralize, not merely wound. He's fighting for closure. Carter, meanwhile, is using the environment as his weapon, a distraction that might involve accidentally setting off a theatrical pyrotechnic display or deploying a complex piece of street furniture as a makeshift battering ram. The emotional core remains the same. Lee needs the perfection of the execution, while Carter needs the spectacle of the chaos to succeed. Their shared victory is never one of harmonious merging, but rather one of successful, synchronized divergence, two completely different engines running at peak capacity, somehow reaching the same destination without entirely destroying the vehicle. The aftermath always brings the quiet, the uncomfortable settling of adrenaline, and the inescapable reality of bureaucratic cleanup. As the Paris dust settles, there's a shared, unspoken acknowledgement of the sheer absurdity of their success. Lee, ever the professional, is already mentally cataloging the evidence, ensuring the chain of custody is impeccable, a habit ingrained from years serving the rigid structures of the Hong Kong police force before his liaison role. He looks toward the horizon, a deep-seated weariness beneath his composed exterior, the cost of constantly battling the past while navigating the present. He sees the closure regarding Shen not just as an arrest, but as a necessary severance from the old loyalties that have haunted his career choices. Carter, conversely, is already negotiating with the local authorities over paperwork, likely trying to claim ownership of a particularly dramatic piece of non-lethal evidence, perhaps a ridiculously ornate hat or a broken piece of antique furniture he somehow managed to incorporate into the final takedown. His energy, momentarily depleted, snaps back quickly, already focusing on the narrative he'll craft for the press, a narrative that will undoubtedly minimize Lee's critical contributions and exaggerate his own near-death experience involving a very expensive wine cellar. His charisma is already working overtime, trying to charm his way out of the international incident they've narrowly avoided creating. The final moments invariably involve the familiar, ritualistic parting at an airport. There is no grand declaration of friendship, only the subtle acknowledgement of reliance. Lee understands that Carter's recklessness, when channeled correctly, functions as an unexpected pressure valve, releasing the tension that Lee's own rigid control cannot always manage. Carter, deep down, knows that Lee's methodical precision is the anchor that keeps their entire partnership from drifting into utter anarchy. They might exchange a curt nod, or perhaps Carter will offer a truly terrible piece of advice about buying Parisian souvenirs, to which Lee will only offer a slight, almost imperceptible tightening around the eyes. They board separate flights, one seeking the structured calm of home, the other buzzing with the promise of a loud, celebratory debriefing back in Los Angeles. They are heading in opposite directions, yet the audience knows, with absolute certainty, that the next global crisis requiring both meticulous discipline and spectacular mayhem will inevitably drag them back into the same pressurized cabin, ready to repeat the glorious, frustrating symphony of their mismatched partnership. The airport scene is always a study in controlled decompression for Lee, a necessary pause before his internal systems reset to their default state of disciplined readiness. He checks his luggage, not because he fears loss, but because the ritual of organization is calming. He seeks out the quietest corner of the terminal, perhaps reviewing training tapes in his mind, the muscle memory a more reliable comfort than the chaotic aftermath they've just escaped. His emotion toward Carter in these moments is complex: frustration at the near misses, respect for the sheer brute force effectiveness of his partner's improvisation, and a quiet resignation that this is simply the price of achieving true resolution. Lee's career has been defined by honor and duty. Carter is the necessary, messy variable that allows him to fulfill that duty in a world that doesn't always respect straight lines. Carter, meanwhile, treats the airport as a final stage. He's already on the phone, likely to a reporter he knows socially, practicing the sound bites that will define the mission for the American public. He's wearing something entirely inappropriate for international travel, perhaps sunglasses indoors or a jacket that doesn't quite fit the climate, a visible declaration that he remains untamed by foreign customs. His energy is sustained not by rest, but by the anticipation of retelling the story. He needs the validation of the chaos he survived. He might stop briefly near Lee, not to say goodbye formally, but to lean in conspiratorially and whisper something utterly useless, like an invented story about a French pastry he nearly choked on, ensuring Lee gets one last involuntary flicker of annoyance before they part. Their departure signifies more than just physical distance. It reflects their philosophical separation. Lee is returning to an environment where he is understood, where precision is the currency of respect. He craves the predictable structure that helps him maintain the high standards set by his dedication to martial arts mastery and his loyalty to the memory of those he has lost. Carter is eager to return to the familiar, slightly unhinged landscape of the LAPD, where his unconventional methods are tolerated, often celebrated, because they consistently deliver spectacular headline-grabbing arrests. Yet, the unspoken contract binds them tighter than any official document. Lee realizes that without Carter's ability to shatter norms, many missions would stall in procedural quicksand. Carter knows that without Lee's unwavering focus, he would be arrested himself long before reaching the final boss. Their final shared glance across the concourse is a silent agreement. The world is too unpredictable, the villains too resourceful, to rely on only one style of chaos. They are the yin and yang of police work, one the perfectly executed silent strike, the other the deafening, blinding explosion. And though they depart on separate flights, both men are already subconsciously waiting for the inevitable next signal that demands the impossible harmony of their unique, enduring partnership. The silence that follows their parting at the gate feels earned, heavy with the weight of shared danger and unspoken understanding. Lee watches the boarding announcement for his flight with a detached air, his posture already subtly adjusting for the long-haul flight back to the east, preparing his body for the return to rigorous routine. His mind is already running through the debriefing reports he will need to file, reports that will be neat, factual, and will deliberately omit the moments where Carter's idiocy accidentally saved their lives. For Lee, the preservation of order in the documentation is almost as important as the apprehension of the criminal. It is the final act of respecting the process, even when the process was nearly derailed by his partner's antics. He carries the Parisian adventure not as a thrilling anecdote, but as another notch in the belt of necessary compromises made in the pursuit of absolute justice for Han. Carter, meanwhile, is likely already striding through the terminal toward the nearest loud vendor, probably seeking out the most garish, oversized souvenir he can find as a physical trophy of his survival. His excitement is infectious, even to himself. For him, the trip was a validation of his core belief that life is best lived at full volume. He has already mentally rewritten the script of the entire Paris sequence, transforming potential disaster into a series of daring, calculated risks only he could have pulled off. His internal narrative doesn't allow for failure or undue modesty. He is the hero, and Lee is the highly skilled, slightly temperamental supporting character who provides the necessary setups for his punchlines. Carter thrives in the messy ambiguity of American law enforcement, where charisma often trumps procedure, a stark contrast to the clear lines of authority Lee has always respected. As Lee finally boards, sinking into a seat that offers just enough isolation, he allows himself a brief, unguarded moment of contemplation. He thinks of the delicate dance in Paris, how he had to anticipate not just the movements of the enemy, but the unpredictable trajectory of his partner. It's a level of strategic thinking that goes beyond martial arts philosophy. It's situational awareness elevated to an art form. He recognizes that Carter, for all his flaws, possesses an instinctual understanding of human pressure points that Lee, with all his training, can only approximate. Lee's dedication is to mastering himself. Carter's is to mastering the moment, regardless of the preparation. This foundational difference is what makes their connection durable. They don't seek comfort in each other, but rather necessary challenge and complement. Lee provides the foundation of discipline, the silent assurance that the critical task will be executed flawlessly. Carter provides the necessary explosive energy, the ability to shatter an entrenched situation that careful planning could never breach. They are both driven professionals, yet their respective careers, Lee's steeped in martial heritage and structured duty, Carter's fueled by chaotic instinct and popular appeal, have forged them into an anomaly. They part not as friends in the conventional sense, but as two essential halves of a single, highly effective and utterly exhausting machine, already dormant, awaiting the next irresistible force that will spin them back into turbulent orbit. The true measure of their shared ordeal only becomes apparent once they are physically separated by continents and air pressure. Lee, once settled on his flight, finds his exhaustion settling in, a deep, bone-weary ache that reflects the emotional toll of confronting the ghost of his past mentor through the proxy of Shai Shen. He often finds that the silence of a solitary journey allows the ghosts to whisper loudest. His career has always been about control over his body, his temper, and the environment. But Carter represents an uncontrolled external factor that constantly threatens to derail that perfect equilibrium. Lee reviews the fight sequences in his mind, focusing on where he could have tightened his defense, never on where Carter's clumsy intervention saved him from a blade that was too fast to see coming. This internalized critique is his way of processing the risk. If he can find the flaw in his own execution, the chaos caused by his partner seems less frighteningly arbitrary. Back in the United States, Carter's re-entry is predictably bombastic. He doesn't just arrive, he makes an entrance. He likely bypasses the standard police escort, preferring to call a friend with a flashy car to pick him up directly from the tarmac, much to the chagrin of any federal agents lingering nearby. His mind is already racing ahead to the mandatory press conference, where he will paint the Parisian escapade as a testament to American gumption triumphing over sophisticated foreign villainy. He uses humor as armor, deflecting any serious inquiry about international cooperation or protocol breaches with a well-timed joke about French cuisine. Carter's success in the LAPD is predicated on his ability to deliver results loud enough to drown out any procedural complaints, a career path built on instinct, and an almost supernatural ability to read the room's immediate needs, even if those needs involve hanging precariously from a chandelier. What binds them is a shared understanding of the stakes, even if they articulate those stakes differently. Lee sees the fight against organized crime as a long, continuous act of upholding tradition and order. For him, every successful mission is a defense of the moral structure he clings to. Carter, more grounded in the immediate, visceral reality of the street, sees it as a series of discrete battles where the only truly important outcome is making it to the next day. He needs Lee's grounded focus to give his own wild energy direction. Otherwise, his career trajectory would have peaked years ago in a spectacular internal affairs investigation. Their eventual meeting, perhaps weeks later when the next mandatory training seminar or international incident forces their paths to cross, will be devoid of sentiment. There will be no hugs, perhaps just a shared, weary glance across a crowded briefing room. Carter might clap Lee roughly on the shoulder, a gesture Lee will endure with stoic patience, and make a fleeting reference to a successful, if understated, detail from the Paris mission. Lee will respond with a barely perceptible nod, a gesture that conveys volumes. It was handled. Do not mistake my restraint for affection. They are a unit of necessity, two opposing forces generating immense kinetic energy, destined to be pulled back together by the gravitational pull of the next inevitable crisis, confirming that true partnership often looks less like harmony and more like the successful management of irreconcilable differences. The interlude between missions is never truly restful for either man. It is merely a transition period where their respective worlds attempt to reassert their dominance. Lee returns to the familiar, structured confines of his Hong Kong environment, or perhaps a dedicated training facility, where the demands are clear and the path to mastery is linear. Here, he immerses himself in the physical discipline that forms the core of his being. He seeks out forms of kung fu so ancient they border on meditation, finding solace in the predictable physics of a well-executed block or strike. This rigorous focus is his armor against the modern ambiguities he encounters with Carter. In his own training space, there are no messy variables, only the pursuit of perfect efficiency. He is the embodiment of the principle that true power lies in absolute self-control, a philosophy honed under the strictest instructors. Carter, conversely, finds the quiet of routine unbearable. Back in Los Angeles, he seeks out the noise, the immediate stimulation that validates his existence. He gravitates toward high-profile, low-stakes departmental events, or perhaps volunteers for community outreach programs where his natural showmanship can be deployed to win over local politicians or school children. He needs the external affirmation that his methods, loud, flashy, and frequently bordering on insubordination, are ultimately beneficial to the public good. His downtime is spent analyzing the footage from Paris, not to correct tactical errors, but to find new angles for his personal anecdotes. He sees his career as a series of narrative arcs, and he ensures he is always cast as the unexpected savior, the man who bends the rules just enough to deliver justice with flair. The emotional undercurrent between them, though never overtly discussed, is one of mutual, grudging dependence. Lee recognizes that his adherence to protocol sometimes blinds him to the necessary shortcuts required in a fast-moving global threat. He possesses the roadmap, but sometimes misses the critical detour sign. Carter, who misses all the road signs entirely, happens to crash directly into the hidden destination. Lee views Carter's reliance on instinct not as incompetence, but as a highly specialized, albeit terrifying, tool that must be carefully aimed. Carter's view of Lee is perhaps simpler. He is the immovable object necessary to balance his irresistible force. He respects Lee's commitment, a level of dedication he himself cannot maintain outside the immediate thrill of a crisis, but he finds Lee's constant seriousness exhausting. Carter's great inspiration isn't a particular police officer. It's the broad, chaotic energy of American cinematic heroes who win not through elegance, but through sheer force of will and excellent timing. When the inevitable summons comes, a coded message, a late-night call from a concerned ambassador, or an alarming diplomatic incident, it is received with an almost synchronized sigh of recognition. For Lee, it means the brief respite of order is over. For Carter, it means the return to high-octane action is imminent. They do not coordinate their schedules. The The universe simply arranges for them to land in the same high-stakes location, ready to resume their dance. The expectation isn't a peaceful reunion, but rather a high-velocity collision of two entirely different philosophies forced to function as one, proving once again that the most effective solutions often emerge from the most unlikely and persistent friction. The renewal of their partnership is never greeted with enthusiasm, but rather a shared, almost physical bracing for impact. When the call finally comes, perhaps originating from the ornate, high-security chambers of Interpol, a body attempting to impose order on their inherent disorder, Lee is already halfway through a self-imposed 10-day isolation designed to purge the lingering sensory input of the last adventure. He answers with the clipped formality of a man who has already mentally outlined the next 3 steps of the investigation before the caller has finished identifying themselves. His immediate reaction to the assignment is to assess the potential for necessary procedural adherence, a baseline requirement that he knows Carter will immediately treat as an optional suggestion. Carter, naturally, is found in a setting far removed from professional readiness. Maybe he is hosting an impromptu motivational seminar for rookie officers at the firing range, using his Paris experience as a primary case study, peppered heavily with anecdotes that place him in increasingly heroic and entirely fabricated spotlight. He receives the notification with a whoop, viewing the next assignment as an overdue professional vacation combined with mandatory ass-kicking. His preparation for travel involves selecting the loudest possible shirts and ensuring his favorite slightly battered leather jacket is dry-cleaned, prioritizing visual impact over practical utility. He sees the mission not as duty but as a chance to expand his personal legend. The reunion point is usually an anonymous neutral territory, a specific tarmac, a sterile conference room, where the disparity between their current states is most acute. Lee steps off the plane or out of the car looking like he has merely stepped from one controlled environment to another, his energy conserved, his focus sharp. Carter arrives looking like he has already fought 3 small wars on the way to the meeting spot, radiating a disorganized but potent kinetic energy. The first exchange is always transactional, cutting past pleasantries. Shen's associates have surfaced in Berlin, Lee might state, offering a precise file. Carter's reply will be a loud, slightly off-color joke about German efficiency or beer, designed to break the tension, but succeeding only in tightening Lee's jaw a fraction more. What truly sustains their professional bond is the shared, unspoken understanding that beneath the constant friction lies an absolute trust in the other's capability when the chips are truly down. Lee has seen Carter perform acts of spontaneous, brilliant heroism that no textbook could ever prepare a person for, moments where pure, unthinking reaction saved the day. Carter has witnessed Lee's capacity for absolute physical control under extreme duress, recognizing that Lee's discipline is not a constraint, but a weapon forged in resilience. They operate like specialized tools in a single, highly volatile toolbox, one for intricate lockpicking, the other for blowing the door off its hinges when time is up. Their careers, though wildly divergent in style, have converged on the single truth that neither can achieve total success without the other's inherent opposition. They are set for Berlin, ready to clash, cooperate, and ultimately conquer, propelled forward by the very differences that make them perpetually infuriating to everyone else. The journey to Berlin immediately establishes the familiar, irritating dynamic of their constrained proximity. Lee settles into the airplane seat, his movements economical, immediately pulling out a small, almost invisible cleaning kit to maintain the integrity of a treasured family heirloom. Perhaps a specialized martial arts blade or a very old smooth stone he uses for focus exercises. His mind is already mapping out the geometric possibilities of the Berlin safe houses they might need to secure, analyzing threat vectors based on continental architectural differences. He relies on preparation, a learned response from a life governed by the principle that the unexpected can only defeat the unprepared. his inspiration remains deeply rooted in the philosophy of his early masters. Mastery is the elimination of wasted motion, both physical and mental. Carter, meanwhile, has managed to commandeer a surprisingly large swath of the cabin, attempting to organize a game of high-stakes poker with the flight attendants, leveraging his inherent, slightly desperate need for entertainment. He views the flight not as transit, but as a mandatory pre-mission networking session. He constantly interrupts Lee's silent concentration with loud pronouncements about his strategic genius, usually involving a reference to a fictional movie scene where the hero utilized a questionable tactic. Carter's career at the LAPD has been built on the narrative that he is the people's detective, charming his way past bureaucratic censure through sheer public relations savvy, a style that requires constant performance, even at 30,000 feet. When they land, the German setting offers a new landscape for their clashing methodologies. The European police force they encounter is sternly efficient, organized, and utterly unamused by Carter's attempts to nickname their senior inspector. Lee finds a strange, austere comfort in the German adherence to order. It feels like a slightly colder, more rigid version of the structured discipline he respects. He can work within their framework, using their meticulous evidence processing to his advantage, mapping the triad's movements through verifiable data points. Carter struggles mightily with the precision required. Where he excelled in Paris by exploiting the French penchant for drama, here his volume seems to deflate against the stoic German response. He attempts to improvise an interrogation technique based on an old blues song, which only results in the German officers exchanging looks of profound pity. It is only when the situation devolves into genuine physical confrontation, a moment where pure, unrefined reaction is required, that Carter's improvisational genius flares to life. He is adept at utilizing unconventional, heavy urban furniture as improvised weaponry, demonstrating an understanding of mass and momentum that belies his supposed lack of academic rigor. The investigation leads them into the shadowy remnants of Berlin's more complicated past, forcing Lee to confront historical echoes of oppression that resonate deeply with his own cultural background, adding a layer of grim solemnity to his already determined focus. He sees the persistence of organized evil across borders and generations. In a tense moment, while Lee is meticulously dissecting electronic surveillance, Carter, through sheer accidental luck, bumps into a courier carrying vital intelligence, startling the man into dropping his encrypted device into a conveniently placed puddle of beer, a disaster for the data, but a triumph for Carter's immediate need for action. It's always the same ballet. Lee builds the perfect trap, and Carter, often by tripping over the bait, forces the enemy into it. They are heading toward another explosive climax, where the necessity of their mismatched skills will once again prove that the most effective law enforcement team is often the one that irritates itself into success. The Berlin operation soon spirals into a claustrophobic race against time, the Triad's network proving to be deeply embedded in the city's financial and technological underbelly. Lee thrives in this environment of hidden data and complex logistics. His mastery of intricate martial arts forms translates surprisingly well to deciphering complex security protocols. He approaches code-breaking with the same iterative, disciplined practice he applies to mastering a difficult kata. He sees the villain's reliance on technology as a weakness, a lack of the fundamental human connection that true strength requires. A weakness Carter, paradoxically, is best equipped to exploit. Carter finds the stoicism of the German environment incredibly frustrating. He misses the immediate emotional feedback loop of Los Angeles. He attempts to rally the local tactical team by invoking the spirit of high-stakes American action films, using exaggerated Americanisms that only deepen the cultural chasm. However, his breakthrough in Berlin comes not through charm, but through recognizing a shared, primal human desire: vanity. He notices that the Triad's local lieutenant, despite his criminal aspirations, is excessively concerned with maintaining an impeccably tailored image. Carter exploits this, arranging a scenario where the lieutenant's reputation is threatened more than his freedom, causing the man to make a rash, public mistake that provides Lee with the hard surveillance target he needed. It's a testament to Carter's career development. He learned early on that people, regardless of their discipline, always have a weak spot that ego will expose faster than a taser. The emotional climax in Berlin revolves not just around stopping the triad, but around preserving a piece of historical or cultural significance that the triad is threatening to destroy as leverage, a structure that mirrors Lee's own need to preserve the past. Lee fights with an almost desperate precision, recognizing that destroying heritage is the ultimate act of nihilism. He channels the disciplined fury of his lineage, delivering a performance that is breathtaking in its efficiency, neutralizing threat after threat with silent, blinding speed. Carter's contribution, when the final confrontation erupts inside a historic train station or landmark, is purely logistical chaos. He might accidentally detach a massive advertising banner, sending it swinging down like a giant clumsy net onto the henchmen, or perhaps trigger a complex series of automated doors that traps key adversaries. His success is always reliant on turning the environment into a weapon, a skill born from years of chasing suspects through the labyrinthine, sprawling chaos of LA streets. He wins by sheer unpredictable entanglement. As the dust settles over the meticulously organized wreckage, there is a moment where the two stand side by side, breathing hard, surrounded by extremely confused but ultimately grateful German authorities. Lee offers a single, genuine word of approval, perhaps efficient, directed at Carter's final, unexpected move, a compliment that carries the weight of a profound oath for him. Carter simply grins, pumping his fist weakly, already anticipating the inevitable, slightly exaggerated write-up he will submit back home. They separate again, heading towards their respective spheres of influence, richer in shared experience, yet fundamentally unchanged. The immovable object and the unstoppable force, temporarily aligned, waiting for the next global crisis to demand their volatile coexistence. The journey away from Berlin carries a distinct, lingering scent of damp stone and high-octane adrenaline, a mixture that Lee finds strangely cleansing compared to the humid predictability of L. On his flight back toward the familiar order of his primary base, Lee finds himself reflecting not on the victory, but on the subtle shift in Carter's methodology. He notes that Carter is beginning to understand the value of structured chaos, that even a wild improvisation needs a target that Lee has carefully defined. This is progress, excruciatingly slow progress, but progress nonetheless. Lee allows himself a fleeting sense of satisfaction, recognizing that the constant exposure to Carter is slowly, infinitesimally, eroding the rigid shell of his own methodology, forcing him to consider possibilities outside the realm of perfected form. He smooths the creases from a traditional silk garment he carries, the tactile sensation, a grounding ritual against the abstract threat of the next assignment. He harbors no illusions of changing Carter, but he accepts the utility of the American's disruptive nature, viewing it as a necessary if highly flammable component in global security. Carter, upon his return to the buzzing, sun-drenched chaos of Los Angeles, is instantly enveloped by his element. The German order felt like a straitjacket. L is a sandbox where the rules are negotiable. He is immediately swarmed by precinct well-wishers, eager for the details of the European adventure. He delivers a masterful performance, minimizing the collaborative effort while amplifying the danger. He claims the key piece of evidence was recovered from beneath a collapsing section of the Berlin Wall, a complete fabrication, and that Lee was briefly incapacitated by exotic European food poisoning, also false. He needs the audience, the validation that his brand of spectacular heroism is appreciated on home soil. Yet, even amid the cheering, a small, unfamiliar seed of introspection remains from the Berlin mission. He remembers Lee's almost spiritual defense of the historical site and recognizes that some stakes transcend the immediate arrest. Some things are worth fighting for that can't be summarized in a soundbite. He's already planning a truly outrageous celebratory dinner, but for the first time, he might actually invite Lee. A gesture so out of character that he immediately cancels the thought, figuring Lee would rather face Shen again than endure a 5-course meal with him, the real testament to their bond surfaces in the quiet reporting phase. When Lee submits his flawlessly detailed, technically precise after-action report, he includes a single, carefully worded sentence praising Carter's unconventional but ultimately decisive environmental manipulation. It's the closest Lee will ever come to an enthusiastic endorsement. Carter, when filing his significantly longer, more colorful report, makes sure to mention Lee's legendary, almost supernatural focus, perhaps comparing his martial arts skill to a highly advanced Swiss watch. Expensive, precise, and utterly baffling to the average beat cop, they exist in a state of perpetual anticipation for the next summons. Their partnership is not about comfort or companionship, it is about the perfect, violent counterpoint required by an increasingly complex criminal landscape. Lee awaits the next threat, knowing he has an unlikely safety net in the form of spectacular, unpredictable failure. Carter awaits the next crisis, knowing he has a bedrock of flawless execution to prevent his own enthusiasm from becoming fatal. They are both professionals dedicated to their respective crafts, and the world, with its endless supply of high-stakes threats, will inevitably force them back into that shared, pressurized space where discipline and dazzling recklessness must, for a brief, terrifying period, operate as one. The next assignment is already being drafted in a distant capital, and both men, in their wildly different worlds, feel the low, persistent hum of destiny calling them back together. Rush Hour 3, arriving in 2007, represents the familiar, yet perhaps slightly fatigued culmination of the successful buddy cop formula established by director Brett Ratner and featuring the inimitable pairing of Jackie Chan as Chief Inspector Lee and Chris Tucker as Detective James Carter. This installment relocates the action primarily to Paris, trading the neon-drenched streets of Hong Kong and the vibrant chaos of Los Angeles for a more classical, albeit still action-heavy, European backdrop. The narrative engine is driven by an escalating conspiracy involving the triads, specifically the enigmatic villain Shai Shen, which forces Lee back to his roots in China and then pulls Carter along for an international escapade. Chan's performance remains the anchor of the film's physical language. By 2007, Chan was already a global icon, his career spanning decades where he meticulously blended martial arts mastery with often slapstick physical comedy. His influence on global action cinema is undeniable. He championed a style where the danger was real, the stunts unassisted, and the choreography breathtakingly inventive. In Rush Hour 3, while his agility perhaps shows slight modulation due to age compared to his peak Hong Kong years, the precision remains evident. Lee serves as the straight man, the moral compass perpetually exasperated by Carter's antics, embodying the disciplined professional thrust into the bizarre circus that follows his partner. Tucker, meanwhile, continues to mine the vein of high-octane verbal humor that defined his early career, particularly his work in the Friday series. Carter's defining characteristic is his relentless, rapid-fire patter, his complete inability to respect cultural boundaries, and his reliance on American bravado when faced with foreign danger. This dynamic, the clash between East meets West discipline and undisciplined cultural exchange, is the core comedic scaffolding of the entire franchise. However, in this third iteration, that scaffolding creaks slightly. The jokes surrounding Carter's ignorance and Lee's patience feel recycled, lacking the freshness of the first film where this cultural juxtaposition was novel. The Paris setting offers some visual appeal, allowing for sequences in recognizable landmarks like the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre, although these set pieces often feel perfunctory, a necessary backdrop for the action rather than an integrated part of the storytelling. The choreography here leans heavily on Chan's expertise, particularly a standout fight sequence within a busy restaurant that showcases classic Chinese environmental interaction, using props and architecture to create kinetic humor alongside genuine threat. The central theme, even more pronounced here, is the necessity of true partnership transcending cultural and personal differences. The plot thickens with the introduction of Soo Young, Lee's childhood friend, and now a key player in the investigation, adding a layer of personal history that Lee must navigate alongside the espionage. The film struggles, however, with pacing and narrative coherence. The conspiracy feels overly convoluted, a necessary burden to justify the global travel rather than a truly compelling mystery. Ultimately, Rush Hour 3 functions primarily as a nostalgia trip for fans eager to see Chan and Tucker back in their established roles. It succeeds marginally on the strength of their chemistry, the genuine affection underneath the constant bickering, but it fails to innovate or significantly raise the stakes beyond what was already established. It settles comfortably into the expected rhythms, providing an enjoyable, if somewhat predictable, final chapter to the established trilogy, relying heavily on the audience's pre-existing investment in the odd couple dynamic rather than crafting a fresh, essential cinematic experience. The enduring appeal of this pairing, often referred to as the odd couple writ large across global cinema, is that beneath the surface of professional frustration and cultural clashes, there lies a deep, almost familial bond. For Lee, the relentless pursuit of justice is intrinsically tied to his sense of duty to his homeland, a duty that often isolates him. We see moments where the weight of this responsibility shows, particularly when dealing with the emergence of Shai Shen, a threat that pulls at the very fabric of his past connections. Chan portrays this internal conflict with his signature subtle expressions. The frustration Lee feels isn't just about Carter's volume, but about the constant distraction from a mission that carries profound personal consequence. His dedication, honed through years of rigorous training, and his commitment to bringing a more grounded, less flashy style of action to Hollywood, is the bedrock the film rests upon. Carter, on the other hand, treats every international crisis as an impromptu vacation punctuated by loud observations. Tucker's comedic energy is relentless. He thrives on injecting American colloquialisms into delicate diplomatic situations, a trait that, while tiresome for Lee, and perhaps the audience by this point, serves as his armor. Carter's bravado masks a genuine, if clumsy, loyalty. His motivations are rarely about high-stakes espionage. They are about sticking by his partner and surviving the next explosion or chase scene with his tailored suits only moderately soiled. His inspiration seems drawn from the loud, confident figures of 1990s stand-up and urban cinema, contrasting sharply with Lee's measured, classical approach derived from Hong Kong action cinema's disciplined masters. When they find themselves in the labyrinthine streets of Paris, Carter's cultural faux pas become exaggerated for comedic effect. He views European subtlety with suspicion, leading to memorable if utterly unhelpful interactions with French law enforcement figures, who are suitably portrayed as baffled by the sheer kinetic chaos Lee and Carter bring with them. The film tries hard to integrate the grand European settings into the action vocabulary they established earlier. For instance, the sequence involving the escalating skirmish within the confines of a moving vehicle, a staple of the genre, feels particularly kinetic, emphasizing Chan's ability to transform mundane objects into weapons or obstacles. However, the emotional resonance required to elevate this sequel above mere spectacle is thin. The narrative thread involving Soo Young feels underdeveloped, serving more as a convenient plot device to give Lee personal stakes rather than a fully explored relationship dynamic. We sense the history between them, but the script rarely grants these moments the necessary breathing room amidst the explosions and one-liners. The film seems locked in a loop. Set up danger, Carter misunderstands the local customs. Lee saves the day using advanced martial arts. Carter makes a joke about the aftermath. While this loop is precisely what the franchise promises, Its repetition in the third installment suggests creative exhaustion. The film is less an evolution and more a perfectly engineered echo of its predecessors, prioritizing familiar comfort over ambitious storytelling. It's a product built to satisfy an expectation, but one that ultimately leaves the viewer admiring the execution of the formula, rather than being genuinely surprised by the journey. The inherent conflict fueling the latter half of the trilogy stems from the maturity, or lack thereof, in their relationship dynamic. Lee carries the burden of expectation, not only from the Hong Kong police hierarchy, but also from the memory of his deceased father and the obligations tied to his childhood friend, Soo Young. This seriousness necessitates a more measured emotional response, often conveyed through the subtle tightening around Chan's eyes as he processes Carter's latest transgression. Lee's dedication to procedure acts as a necessary counterweight to the encroaching chaos, yet it also highlights his isolation. He is the ultimate professional grappling with a world that refuses to adhere to logic, a world often exemplified by his partner. Carter's emotional palette, conversely, is broad and immediate. His responses are loud, visceral, and rooted firmly in American pop culture references, which often serve as a defense mechanism against the perceived sophistication of his surroundings. His exasperation with the triad's complex hierarchy contrasts with his utter ease in navigating a chaotic street brawl, as long as he can pepper it with witty commentary. Tucker's greatest strength here is sustaining that energy across an international setting even when the material feels stretched thin. His infectious enthusiasm, even when misplaced, prevents the film from becoming entirely bogged down by the seriousness of the triad plot. He functions as the audience surrogate who simply refuses to take the elegant European locales seriously, translating the grand adventure into relatable, albeit loud, terms. The specific choreography in Paris leans into environmental satire. The fight sequences involving the massive presence of the triad foot soldiers feel more densely packed than usual, forcing Chan to utilize tighter, more localized movements rather than sweeping acrobatic displays. The famous glass elevator sequence, for example, demonstrates a calculated use of confined space, maximizing the tension inherent in the peril while allowing Carter to contribute through accidental rather than intentional assistance, his panic ironically aiding Lee's precision. These moments reaffirm that while the plot may meander, the physical language of the leads remains remarkably synchronized, a testament to years of working together. However, the film frequently stumbles when attempting to inject dramatic weight. The moments intended to solidify the bond between Lee and Carter, such as a shared moment of near death or a quiet realization of mutual respect, feel obligatory rather than earned. The necessary development of Soo Young's role as a central figure in the conspiracy often feels rushed, reducing her character to a MacGuffin that forces Lee into the action. She represents a tangible link to Lee's past, a piece of vulnerability the audience rarely gets to see fully explored, given the relentless pace required to keep the American-style action movie ticking over. In summation, Rush Hour 3 operates best when it functions purely as a series of set pieces designed to showcase the established chemistry. It is a film written by formula, executed by industry veterans who understand the parameters of their success. While the spectacle is competent and the banter intermittently sharp, the underlying emotional stakes of Lee's personal crisis and Carter's adjustment to the global stage are sacrificed for maintaining the established, comfortable, comedic rhythm. It provides closure not through satisfying narrative resolution, but through the simple fact of the partners finishing one more outlandish mission together. The film's reliance on established tropes becomes most evident in its handling of supporting characters and antagonists. Shai Shen, the primary villain, suffers from the franchise's tendency to create villains who are menacing in concept, but ultimately serve as mere vehicles for the lead's action sequences. Shen operates within the shadowy world of organized crime, suggesting a deep, intricate conspiracy that should ideally unravel through meticulous detective work. Instead, the discovery of his identity and motivations is punctuated by sudden reveals that cater to the next action beat, rather than organic narrative progression. His menace is mostly implied through the threats he poses to the Hong Kong police infrastructure and Lee's personal safety, rather than through compelling screen presence or memorable dialogue that could rival the witty exchanges between Carter and Lee. The attempts to integrate Parisian authority figures into the duo's usual dynamic also feel forced. Characters meant to represent competent European police contrast sharply with Carter's chaotic methods, but this contrast seldom leads to genuine tension or comedic payoff beyond the initial culture shock acknowledgement. They exist primarily to be bewildered witnesses to the American whirlwind brought by Carter, or to facilitate access to crucial locations that Lee needs to infiltrate. This reliance on external characters as mere plot facilitators underscores a fundamental limitation of the third entry. The story cannot accommodate new dynamics without sacrificing the precious screen time dedicated to the core partnership's established banter. Furthermore, the film's climax, set amidst the grandeur of the Eiffel Tower, represents a final, perhaps desperate, attempt to deliver an iconic set piece reminiscent of the best moments from the preceding installments. While the choreography is undoubtedly complex, involving multiple moving parts and the verticality of the structure, there is an underlying sense of déjà vu. The stakes feel high because the location is famous, not necessarily because the narrative has built sufficient emotional investment in the outcome of this specific confrontation. Chan executes the requisite acrobatics with professionalism, yet the sheer improbability of the logistics required to engineer such an extended fight sequence high above Paris strains the audience's suspension of disbelief beyond its breaking point, even within the established reality of a buddy cop action movie. It is in these moments of bombast that the film confirms its identity as a victory lap rather than a bold new statement. The filmmakers understood their audience craved the familiar rhythm, the escalating absurdity, the perfectly timed comedic interruption immediately preceding a devastating martial arts blow, and the final moment of exhausted mutual respect. Rush Hour 3 provides this comfort blanket reliably, but in doing so, it sacrifices the sharp edge and narrative novelty that made the original film a significant cultural touchstone. It remains a testament to the undeniable screen magnetism of its two leads, but also a cautionary example of a successful formula exhausting its potential when repeated without substantial reinvention. The emotional core of the franchise, which the third installment strains to maintain, hinges on the unspoken understanding that Lee and Carter operate on entirely different planes of reality, yet are irrevocably tethered. Lee, the disciplined warrior, views the world through a lens of consequence and honor, a perspective deeply informed by his rigorous training and cultural background, where failure often carries familial or societal weight. His quieter frustrations are often expressed not through shouting, but through the subtle slump of his shoulders or the weary sigh that Tucker's Carter invariably fails to register. This dedication to honor is what makes his occasional, reluctant embrace of Carter's chaotic energy so endearing to the audience. It's a crack in the professional facade, a necessary release valve. Carter's emotional landscape, conversely, is characterized by immediate gratification and external validation. His constant need to talk, to assert dominance through volume and cultural comparison, is a direct reflection of an insecurity he masks by transforming every serious situation into a competition he believes he should inherently win by default of being American. His loyalty to Lee, however, is perhaps the most genuine emotion he displays, even if it manifests as exasperated protection. When Lee is placed in true jeopardy, Carter drops the relentless comedy, revealing a fierce, if clumsy, protectiveness rooted in their shared experiences, from the first messy case to this convoluted triad hunt in Europe. This underlying partnership is the engine that allows the audience to forgive the increasingly tenuous plot connections. The interaction with the antagonist figures, particularly Shai Shen, highlights the tonal imbalance. The triads represent a methodical, ancient form of danger that should inherently challenge Li's discipline. Yet, because the narrative structure demands that the film maintain a rapid-fire comedic pace, the villains are often relegated to momentary obstacles rather than deep thematic foils. They lack the personal connection or complex motivation needed to truly test Li's moral framework beyond basic survival. The film needs Shen to be dangerous enough to justify the global travel, but not so complex that the exposition slows down Carter's next one-liner. This balancing act results in antagonists who feel generic, easily dispatched once the plot requires a transition to the next major action set piece, be it a frenetic motorcycle chase through Parisian traffic or the aforementioned tower finale. In retrospect, Rush Hour 3 settles for expertly executing the blueprint of its predecessors without adding any necessary architectural improvements. The emotional depth of Li's commitment to justice and the genuine, if abrasive, friendship with Carter are the only elements that prevent the film from collapsing under the weight of its own repetitive gags. It serves as a satisfying period at the end of the sentence, confirming the enduring appeal of Chan's physical poetry and Tucker's verbal onslaught, but it ultimately lacks the narrative surprise or thematic resonance that defines truly successful trilogy conclusions. It is a film content with being perfectly adequate, a mirror reflecting the established, comfortable image of its stars. The final act of this trilogy leans heavily into the visual language of excess, which is characteristic of large-scale Hollywood action productions of the mid-2000s, often prioritizing spectacle over narrative organicism. When Li and Carter finally corner Shai Shen, the confrontation lacks the sharp, personal sting that might have elevated it beyond a mere culmination of fights. Shen's motivations, wrapped up in triad internal politics and perceived slights, feel distant from the grounded street-level integrity that defined the threats in the first film. The emotional investment required to care deeply about the fate of the triad leadership pales in comparison to the audience's investment in whether Carter can successfully navigate a complicated French menu or if Li will finally snap from exasperation. This dynamic, the audience caring more about the partners' petty squabbles than the primary plot, is a double-edged sword. It confirms the success of the casting and chemistry. Chan and Tucker could likely sustain a film even with a paper-thin plot involving misplaced luggage, simply by contrasting their worldviews. Yet it simultaneously exposes the creative limitations of stretching this premise across 3 major international excursions. Li's internal struggle often feels muted by the necessity of maintaining the high comedic tempo. We see glimpses of the veteran officer who has seen too much, burdened by duty. But these moments are consistently interrupted by Carter's need to inject levity, often forcing Li to repress his deeper emotional responses to maintain his professional facade. Carter's arc, if one can call it that, concludes with a vague acknowledgement that international travel is perhaps marginally less offensive than he initially believed, provided there is adequate opportunity for him to boast. His growth is minimal. He remains the loud tourist, albeit one who now seems slightly more aware of the location of the nearest exit or potential target. This steadfast refusal to truly assimilate, while funny, stunts any possibility of deeper character development for him in this final outing. He is a fixed point of American chaos in a fluid, international setting. The film's resolution, tying up the loose ends of the triad threat and restoring a semblance of order to the international chaos they have caused, feels more like an obligation fulfilled than a cathartic ending. The genuine emotion surfaces only in the final moments of their departure, a quiet acknowledgement of shared survival. Li and Carter part ways, ready to resume their respective lives, their bond reaffirmed not by overcoming a complex villain, but by enduring each other's company through another globe-trotting adventure. Rush Hour 3 is ultimately less a narrative culmination and more a high-budget, highly polished curtain call for a partnership whose magic lay in its initial, unexpected friction. A friction that by the third time around feels more like well-worn habit than electric chemistry. The enduring nature of the Rush Hour formula, as solidified and perhaps calcified in this third entry, speaks volumes about the power of personality overriding plot mechanics in commercial cinema. The primary inspiration for this success seems rooted not in revolutionary storytelling, but in the precise calibration of opposites. Jackie Chan, drawing from his decades spent mastering cinematic kung fu, where every movement tells a story of discipline, sacrifice, and precision, acts as the physical narrator. His commitment to practical effects and kinetic grace provides the film with a gravitas that the script often fails to generate. When Lee fights, the danger feels palpable. The audience is watching a master craftsman at work, a stark contrast to the CGI-heavy action prevalent during this era. Chris Tucker's contribution is the antithesis of this control. His inspiration draws from the rapid-fire, improvisational energy of stand-up comedy and the confrontational swagger of 90s urban cinema. Carter doesn't master his environment, he shouts over it, attempting to bend foreign locales to the expectations of American brashness. This dynamic is the bread and butter of the franchise, yet in 2007, the seams of repetition show plainly. Carter's jokes about French cuisine or police bureaucracy feel like callbacks rather than spontaneous reactions, suggesting the writers were relying on the audience's muscle memory of what Tucker is supposed to say, rather than crafting fresh material for his character in this new context. The setting of Paris itself feels underutilized in terms of cultural immersion for the characters, serving primarily as a palette for large-scale destruction. While the fight choreography involving the environment, such as utilizing the tight confines of a vehicle or the dizzying heights of the tower, is technically brilliant on Chan's part, these sequences are often presented with the expectation that the sheer athleticism will eclipse any need for deeper emotional engagement with the location. The narrative justification for their presence, the shadowy triad conspiracy, never quite gels into a compelling mystery. It functions merely as the necessary mechanism to transport Lee and Carter from one visually distinct international locale to the next, ensuring the global scope feels earned, even if the stakes feel interchangeable. Ultimately, the film functions as a highly polished echo chamber. It confirms the enduring appeal of the central odd couple, the disciplined master and the exuberant clown, but it fails to provide a concluding chapter that challenges them in a way that forces genuine growth. The emotional landscape remains largely transactional. Lee needs Carter's ability to break protocol. Carter needs Lee's ability to avoid being arrested or killed. This reliance on established comfort means that Rush Hour 3 lands with a familiar thud of satisfaction, appreciating the undeniable synergy between its stars without offering a compelling argument for why this particular story needed to be told after the previous two iterations had already mined the core comedic conflict so thoroughly. The recurring motif in the trilogy, subtly emphasized in this final chapter, is the fundamental difference in how Lee and Carter process danger and success. For Lee, every victory is temporary, a brief reprieve before the next professional challenge inevitably surfaces. His emotional regulation is absolute, a necessity born from a culture that prizes restraint. When he expresses relief or affection, it is usually through a minimal gesture, a brief nod, or the momentary lowering of his perpetually guarded expression. This restraint makes his rare bursts of genuine, unfiltered frustration with Carter all the more potent. It signals that Carter has truly crossed a line, breaching the professional armor Lee has spent a lifetime cultivating. Chan's genius here is making the exhaustion of maintaining that professionalism palpable without resorting to melodrama, letting the physical toll of the action sequences speak for his internal weariness. Carter, conversely, processes everything outwardly, turning potential tragedy into a punchline, not just for the audience, but seemingly as a psychological shield for himself. His interactions with the antagonist's network are characterized by a desperate attempt to simplify complex criminal structures into easily digestible, often Americanized caricatures. This inability to grasp nuance is his comedic signature, yet it also reveals a character deeply uncomfortable with ambiguity. When the plot demands genuine introspection, like when Soo-young's past directly implicates Lee, Carter often defaults to loud distraction, steering the scene back toward kinetic action where he understands the rules of engagement. His inspiration remains rooted in unfiltered expression, making him the perfect, volatile counterpoint to Lee's disciplined stillness. The Paris sequences often highlight this disparity in execution. While the fights are technically superlative, showcasing Chan's ability to weaponize everything from banisters to kitchen utensils, the dramatic weight surrounding these fights is curiously light. The inherent peril of fighting triad assassins on the top of the Eiffel Tower is immediately undercut by Carter cracking a joke about altitude sickness or the quality of the view. This constant tonal whiplash prevents the audience from fully investing in the danger, as the film telegraphs that no matter how precarious the situation, the partnership will survive unscathed, primarily through Lee's prowess and Carter's accidental good fortune. In analyzing the film's overall resonance, it functions less as a narrative zenith and more as a fond farewell tour. The energy is infectious, fueled by the goodwill accumulated from the previous films. The audience comes expecting the specific rhythm. The East meets West, misunderstanding leading to physical comedy, followed by stunning martial arts. And the film delivers this package with near-perfect fidelity. However, in achieving this fidelity, it sacrifices the possibility of surprising the seasoned viewer. The emotional payoff is not the resolution of the triad plot, but the quiet, unspoken confirmation that despite everything, Lee and Carter remain constants in each other's increasingly chaotic lives. It is a satisfying, yet entirely predictable closing statement on a highly successful formula. The structural dependency on the chemistry between Lee and Carter leads to a noticeable flattening of any external narrative elements. The triad hierarchy, meant to represent a formidable, ancient criminal organization, is ultimately reduced to a series of interchangeable henchmen who exist solely to facilitate the next choreographed confrontation. Shai Shen, as the mastermind, never achieves the menacing gravitas needed to balance the sheer comedic force of Tucker. His motivations, a combination of revenge and internal power struggles, are presented with such swift exposition that they barely register as more than plot requirements necessary to justify the international pursuit. In this sense, the villain operates much like a complex obstacle on a video game level. Once defeated, the level is cleared, and the player moves on without dwelling on the antagonist's philosophical depth. This structural weakness is particularly apparent when the film attempts to integrate moments of pathos, especially concerning Lee's past connection to Soo-young. These moments are fleeting, designed to give Lee a personal stake that transcends mere police duty, but they are immediately overwhelmed by the need to keep the comedic momentum high. Chan portrays Lee's vulnerability with immense skill, a slight hesitancy in his posture, a flicker of deep-seated sadness, but the script offers no space for these emotions to breathe. Carter, true to his nature, either misinterprets the gravity of the situation or attempts